The Cincinnati Reds got a new hitting coach that helped Cleveland take a big step forward.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds. Welcome in. My name is Jeff Carr. I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan, and I've been doing this show now going into my 7th off season, talking about the Reds every single day, every single week, all month long, all year long, because we are Locked On Reds, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, your Cincinnati Reds, every single day. And Locked On Reds is for the Reds fan who knows what happened. They want to know why. We're going to talk about the big stories going on in Reds country. We'll dive into some analytics and make them make sense. And overall, we'll just have fun talking Reds baseball. I'm so glad that you're alongside me here today, though, because on today's show, we are going to, with the World Series beginning, we're going to look back on some memories of the last Reds World Series championship, and we're going to talk to our brand new Locked On A's host about that game. Also, you might have missed this quote from Terry Francona that could give insight into how he will deal with struggling players like Noelvi, Marte, and CES. I'll tell you what that is here in just a few minutes, but I want to start with the new hitting coach the Reds just hired. That's all coming up on today's Locked On Reds podcast that is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And the Reds have made it official. They now have a hitting coach. And what we said whenever Terry Francona was hired is that he's probably going to bring in some guys that he's worked with before, some guys he knows. And he did that. In fact, he got Chris Valaika from the Guardians just today. I mean, Chris Valaika was coaching with Cleveland for the last 3 years. He was the hitting coach for Cleveland, and he made Cleveland a better lineup under Terry Francona. And I think that he can do the same for this Reds team. Quick Chris Valaika history lesson for everybody that wanted to know that. He played for the Reds for 2 years, played a total of 33 games, so it's not as if he was a huge part of the team. But he did have a homer for the Reds back in 2010. In fact, just his 3rd game with the Reds. But 2010, 2011, he played 33 games for the Reds. Played 22 games for the Marlins in 2013 and 44 games for the Cubs in 2014. So didn't really put together a whole lot of Major League service time, but he made it to the bigs. But he has been a pretty good hitting coach for the Cleveland Guardians. Consider this. In the year of our Lord 2021, the Cleveland Guardians ranked 11th in batting average in the American League. We're just talking about the American League, not Major League Baseball, but in the American League, Cleveland ranked 11th in batting average in 2011. They ranked 13th in on-base percentage, 10th in OPS, and 7th in strikeouts. They had the 7th most strikeouts in the league. And when you consider that that was the year before Chris Valaika showed up, look at what happened after. The next season, they went from 11th in batting average in the American League to 4th. They went from 13th in on-base percentage to 6th. 10th in OPS to 7th. Here's the kicker. Strikeouts. They went from 7th to 1st. They had the fewest strikeouts in the American League in 2022 under Chris Valaika. Now, he's a guy that, at least for these 3 seasons, was very consistent in that category. At least his lineups were. 2022, they had the fewest strikeouts in the American League. 2023, the fewest strikeouts in the American League. In 2024, well, they fell to 3rd. They had the 3rd fewest strikeouts in the league that year. And with all these stat rankings, I just say that the Guardians lineup got better under Chris Valaika. And I think that there's an element of that he helped out with. You know, you can make the argument that the addition of Stephen Kwan, they didn't have him in 2021, they had him in 2022. That was probably a big part of Cleveland's resurgence at the plate, but Valaika wasn't unimportant to their success. We have seen what a good hitting coach can do for multiple different teams, not just the Reds. And we can see what bad hitting coaches do. but the coaches support the lineup. It's the players that need to produce. So that's the key here. The Reds have their guy leading them. They have Terry Francona at the top. They have Chris Valaika, the guy leading the lineup. Now, who do they fill that lineup with? You've got your guys in Ellie De La Cruz and Jonathan India and Tyler Stevenson, but you do need a couple of guys in the outfield, maybe a cleanup hitter. Can they develop guys like CES and Noelvi Marte? Guys like, are we going to see Will Benson come back, and can they figure him out? Although Chris Valaika and Terry Francona did coach Will Benson back in 2022, and then they traded him. So take that for what you will. There's so many opportunities here on this team, though. And I think it's funny because I know that, leading in up to this news, everybody was like, former player, former Reds player. Guess what? They did that. Not Joey Votto. Not Eric Davis. Not, it's Chris Valaika. But it's a guy who's worked with Terry Francona. And if Terry Francona trusts him, then I trust him. At least until proven otherwise. But it looks as if he did a good thing for the Guardians. And consider that when you consider the canvas with which he gets to paint. Because in 2024 in the National League, the Reds were the worst batting average team in the National League. They were 11th in on base, 12th in OPS, and 11th in strikeouts. They had the 11th, they were the fourth most strikeouts in the league. So there's a lot to work with for Chris Valaika. He's going to be a busy guy. I'll be interested to see exactly what the focus is specifically. I know that there wasn't like a whole lot of reporting as to whether Cleveland was super analytically driven or anything like that. But it certainly seemed like he got the most out of the Guardians lineups over the last 3 years. And that is what he will be tasked with here in Cincinnati. Because that's what Terry Francona has talked about all the time. He continues, and based on whatever interview you saw him on, whether it was the Foul Territory podcast, whether it was on Dan Patrick, whether, it was his introductory press conference, he continues to say, I didn't come here to force them to sign players and force them to go out and make moves. Came here to get the best out of who I was given. I believe him in that regard. I still think they're going to make moves. They didn't get Terry Francona to sand pat and say, yeah, everybody we got here's fine. And all we needed was a better manager. But I do believe that he will get the most out of guys, and Chris Valaika is going to be a big part of that process. Still a few more coaches to fill out. Nothing crazy. You're looking at, guys to replace. Are they going to replace Jeff Pickler's position? Jeff Pickler, more of a strategist type coach. A lot of analytically driven data that he used and stuff like that. From everything that we heard, he was big in making lineups. Kind of feels like this is going to be Terry Francona's show, though. Does that mean that they're going to replace Jeff Pickler's job? I know he was also the outfield coach, so I'm sure they'll replace that. But the whole analytically driven strategist that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. We'll keep an eye out on that. But as these coaching jobs get filled, that means the Reds will turn their attention to the roster, whether it be extensions, whether it be additions, whether it be subtractions. There's going to be a lot happening this offseason, and we're going to be with you every single day, every step of the way. But I really think that the Reds got a guy with a good track record to be their hitting coach. And we'll have a quiz in like 3 months to see if you remember his name. Terry Francona said something, though, that you may have missed, and it may shed some light on what he thinks about Noelvi Marte and CES. Are you already out of it in your fantasy football league? Get back into it with Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. And it's so easy to see why they are the #1 daily fantasy sports app, because you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks in an entry. All you have to do is you pick your 4 favorite players and your favorite statistics. You get a hunch. You think Joe Burrow's going to hit more on the passing yards. Think Jamar Chase is going to hit more on the touchdowns. Pick them. Put them all together in an entry and see your money multiply. Like I said, you could turn $10 even into $1,000 pretty easily. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly. When you play $5, you don't even have to win. That's code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's over at Prize Picks. Run your game. We are talking Reds baseball here today, all day, every week, every month. Make sure that you subscribe and join the everydayers. Love all of our everydayers out there. Let us know in the comment section if you're an everydayer. In fact, give me your reaction in the comment section to Chris Valaika becoming the Reds hitting coach. I know that there's going to be some folks that are sad that it wasn't Joey Votto, but look, if you saw Joey Votto's post on Instagram the other day jumping out of an airplane, he's living his best life in retirement. I think he's probably going to enjoy this a little bit longer before he gets back into the game in whatever capacity that is. But I like the hire, and I'd be curious of your thoughts of that as well. Give us a comment, give us a like as well. Helps the algorithm so more people can find us. I'd appreciate that very much. But you know, Terry Francona actually may be willing to play Christian Encarnacion-Strand and Noelvi Marte more than you might think. He has done a lot of different interviews and going on different shows and different podcasts and talking to some different folks. Still waiting to see if he can jump on with us. But he really talked about a lot of his philosophies as a manager, a lot of things that he does, and a lot of approaches that he has. One of the things that he talked about with Dan Patrick asked him, you know, and I can't play the clip because it's but I can't play the clip. But Dan Patrick asked him about Michael Jordan because Terry Francona was the Birmingham Barons manager, Double-A Birmingham Barons manager, whenever Michael Jordan came through the White Sox system in Double-A. And he was asked by Dan Patrick if he could have coached him, if he could have taught him and prepared him to be a major league ball player. Did he have it? Did Michael Jordan have it in him? Did Terry Francona have it in him to unlock that ability? And Terry Francona said, he talked about how unique Michael Jordan was and his personality and things like that. But he said this quote, "You need to get 1,000 at bats under you before you even make a determination." This is an interesting quote for so many different reasons, and I don't disagree with him. Terry Francona has been at the highest level of this game for a long time, so he knows exactly what he's talking about. I don't doubt what he is saying is true. Now, I take that to mean a couple of different things for CES and Noelvi Marte. I think we are talking about CES and Noelvi Marte as if they are on the cusp of even making the roster. Terry Francona, based on this quote, would say that they're still probably the favorites to win their starting jobs. Noelvi Marte at third base and CES at first, because of how little they've played. They've only had Marte has only had 343 at-bats in the major leagues, and Encarnacion-Strand has only had 338. So there's an element of this, of patience. And that's kind of what takes me to the other side of this quote, and why baseball is such an interesting sport to be a fan of. And I'm not even just talking about specifically for the Reds, but for any fandom. Think about how immediate football is. Think about how immediate basketball is. Guys get drafted, bam, they're starters. They're ready to go day one. In most cases, they're ready to go, but in most cases, they're asked to go day one. That doesn't happen in baseball. There's patience. There's a process. You go through multiple levels of the minor league. You go through multiple levels of training, multiple different coaches with multiple different philosophies, and you're molded into a major leaguer. There's an element of talent and an element of skill that just do not connect until you spend some time in the minor leagues. For most guys, I mean, Mike Leake is a crazy exemption from the rule. He is not the norm when it comes to these sort of situations. So you can't just say, well, Mike Leake, Think of every other player you've ever seen. They don't just skip the minors. So when they go through that process and they develop a little bit, you get scouts talking about them. Consider this. In 849 at-bats in the minor leagues, CES hit .322, and he had an OPS of .990. Terry Francona is going to lean a little bit more on that. He's not going to say that's going to translate, specifically, but you're also going to talk a lot about the scouting reports on him. What are his scouting grades for his different abilities and things like that? This isn't all about the 338 at-bats you've seen from CES in the majors, because there's more to it than that. As much as we think we know based on what we've seen, and there's a lot of times it might be one game and we're just like, he sucks. He cost him that game. He's horrible. That's just not the case with baseball. And Terry Francona understands that. So Terry Francona is going to show patience to guys like Noelvi, Marte, and guys like CES. This is not going to be something that he's going to come in and cracking skulls and you struck out twice yesterday, see you in Louisville. That's not going to happen with him. He gave a lot of different chances to guys on the Guardians and guys on the Red Sox. And all throughout his career, he has managed so many different personalities. And he understands that there's a different management style for each player. But on the whole, when it comes to the game of baseball, patience is the rule. And just like he said, the quote, you need to get 1,000 at-bats before you even make a determination. In some cases, if you play every day and you don't get hurt and you go through 162, you can hit 1,000 at-bats in like 2 years. But in the case of CES and Noelvi Marte, where in our minds they've played for 2 years, in the minds of most people who evaluate baseball, they barely played one. And in most cases, it's that's less than one. 343, 338, whichever guy you look at, that's less than 1 year. That's almost half a year. So the experience that they have under their belt is nowhere near the kind of experience that guys like Terry Francona say they have what they need and I know who they are. He's going to wait. He's going to give them more opportunities. I think we'll see them. I don't necessarily know that means pencil them into the opening day lineup right now, but CES is killing it in Arizona at the moment. Looking pretty good, looking pretty healthy. Really, the health is the only thing you got to worry about there. If he's healthy, he's the favorite to play first base next year. Because think about the alternative. The alternative is Spencer Steer, which then weakens the outfield. And the outfield is already super weak. Now, hopefully they go out and they sign a guy. But if you sign one guy and you move Spencer Steer to first base, you know what you did? Nothing. You rearranged deck chairs on the Titanic. So the Reds understand this. The best version of them is with CES at first base. And you might argue that the best version of them is with Noelvi Marte at third. At least as currently constructed. I'm not talking about, if Edwin Arroyo makes it up, which I don't think he does this year. But as currently constructed, and hopefully with an outfielder or two, Noelvi Marte should be your third baseman. He's the guy who's going to be here in the future, or at least that's the guy that we have penciled in for the future. So we gotta know. We gotta know if he is that guy. And the only way you know is if he plays. Because he ain't going to find that out down in Louisville. In fact, I mentioned CES's minor league numbers, and not because I think that they translate wholly. I'm just saying this was what he saw in the minors. Marte saw even more, almost twice as much. He had 1,555 at-bats in the minor leagues, did Noelvi Marte. He hit .278 with an .817 OPS. Not as great as Encarnacion-Strand, but almost twice as long. So he's seen some things, and I don't necessarily know that sending him down to AAA, I might be coming back around on this, where Steve and I were talking about this a little bit, which I'm sure just means whenever Steve returns next week, we're just going to fight. But I think that Terry Francona is telling us, if these two guys are your corner infielders on opening day, don't be surprised. But Today is the beginning of the World Series, which got me thinking about some memories. Coming up next, I talk with our new Locked On A's host about arguably the most important hit in the history of the Reds. You can get a big return this NFL season over on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same place where you place your bets over at FanDuel. And plus, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet, i.e., you don't even have to win. You place a $5 bet, you get $200 in bonus bets. The World Series is set, and look, regardless of how much we all hate the Dodgers and the Yankees, I think we can all agree that we're, seeing Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge in the World Series is objectively cool. With that, FanDuel has interesting odds set on the World Series going to 7 games. Right now, it's at plus 190. So wagering $10 would get you $19 if the World Series did, in fact, go to 7 games. And look, I want more baseball, so yes, I want that to happen. Let's go over 6.5 games. That's over on FanDuel.com. Make sure you take us with you when you can't watch on YouTube. We are literally on every podcasting app there is. All right. As we welcome in our guest, got to get the right hat on. Well, it is World Series Day. Game 1, Yankees and Dodgers. Yeah, the big guys, the big money. They're all there in the World Series, and here we are. I wanted to have a little bit of memories, and actually, this was, full disclosure, this was our friend Booney's idea over at Locked On A's. He is our brand new host of Locked On A's, and looking back, Booney, now, 34 years ago, the Reds and the A's got together for a memorable World Series. It was a World Series that, leading into it, the Reds had been wire to wire all year long, been first place, just done a fantastic job with a team that got better, but I don't think anybody expected them to be as good as they were. And then they show up in the World Series, and here's the A's, and the A's are feeling all high and mighty. Like, when you kind of look back on this World Series that ended up being a 4-game sweep for the Cincinnati Reds, like, what was your first takeaway just thinking back on that?
This was our 3rd straight World Series appearance. We had the big upset we lost with Gibson and the Dodgers in '88. Then we come back in '89 and sweep the Giants, which was overshadowed a lot by the San Francisco earthquake. So '90 was important, and arguably it was the A's most dominant team. Going into the trade line of 1990, we actually signed Willie McGee, who qualified to win the batting title for the National League that same year. I mean, we were loaded, to say the least. We came in, and I did not know this until I actually looked it up. We came in, I knew we were a huge favorite. We came in as a minus 300 favorite as far as the betting line, which happens to be the largest favorite in World Series history ever. The only other one was the 39 Yankees, who were a minus 300 favorite as well over the Reds, and they ended up sweeping the Reds. So I felt pretty damn good about it. The Reds were a solid squad. Their ace was a former A in Jose Rijo. I had no doubt the A's were going to win, and I felt we had to win it to continue the legacy and possibly be a dynasty. It was such an important World Series.
And that, for me, and full disclosure, by the way, I was 1 year old whenever this World Series happened. So most of mine is secondhand knowledge and watching old games. I love on YouTube, if you get into a hole this offseason where you're just like, man, I need baseball. YouTube has like every postseason game ever.
You really do.
I love it. It's so fantastic. But like going back and watching those games, that for me is why probably, and there are definitely hits throughout history that you can argue this with, but the Eric Davis home run, they're early in game 1, might have been the most important hit in the history of the Reds franchise. Like,
Yeah.
that series, and we Reds fans, and that was very well documented. And I've talked with my dad and some other folks about this. They're just like, yeah, man, we were coming in just like, we got nothing to lose. Nobody expects anything from us. And Eric Davis, just from the word go, says, look, we are here and you got to pay attention to us. And the bomb that he hit, and that was just like, looking back on that, it was such an important hit. And you had the amazing series from Billy Hatcher and all the different sides from the Reds, the different storylines and things like that. And just the way that everything fell in 4 games. But probably the more lighthearted story from the World Series, and I don't know if A's fans are aware of this, but the owner at the time, wonderfully controversial Marte shot for the Cincinnati Reds, was actually mad and did not let the team fly, did not pay for the team to fly home because she wanted the revenue from Game 5. She wanted there to be a Game 5 in Cincinnati. And so whenever the Reds had won in Oakland, she was just like,
I was not aware of that. No, yeah.
You gotta love sports ownership, man.
These two franchises have had a couple special ones, to say the least.
Yeah, a little bit, but
sure. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you said it. Davis set the tone right off the bat, and who would have guessed that Hatcher reaches base his first 9 times? I mean, he was 8 for his first 9, every single big hit. And once we were in a position to win in Game 2, I felt Game 2 was a huge game. And you got to Eckersley, and it was the bottom of your lineup. Everyone forgets about those Reds teams. You had Mariano Duncan batting 8th, who hit 325 during the season. Sabo hit 2 bombs in Game 3. That was huge. You scored 7 in the 3rd. And I felt at that point, it was just the A's packed it in. You're talking about just a perfect team that was assembled that almost just quit. And when I look to that era of the A's, it's disappointing because of that Red series and how it seemed like there was just no fight. I don't know if we took it for granted. I know Canseco came in a little banged up, but so was Davis. I mean, we were all banged up a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, and it was a perfect storm, and the Reds absolutely run away with that. And it also, that Reds team was the first time in baseball, which we're seeing a lot in baseball today, where they tell the starter, hey, go 6, and we're going to turn it over to the bullpen.
Right.
And you guys had that nasty boys. You know, you had Charlton, you had Dibble, and you had Myers in the 9th. All had ERAs under 3. I believe Myers was under 2, I want to say. Just dominant. And once it hit the 6th inning, it was over. And that's what got you to the postseason. It was a together team. Also remember, 88 was the whole Pete Rose deal. So you were just coming off that as well.
And it was a little bit of a situation where you mentioned that, you know, A's fans kind of took it for granted being the 3rd straight World Series. Reds fans took it for granted too, where it was just like, all right, first World Series, this is a young team. Let's go. What do we got? And then everything just kind of fizzled out after that. And lots of different things happened. Like you mentioned, Eric Davis dealing with a lot of injuries and things like that. But it's been a long time since either one of our teams have been to the World Series. This was our last trip. And actually, if you go back 34 years, this was just the 3rd postseason advancement that the Cincinnati Reds have. And at least the A's can say a little bit more than that, and they've been to the postseason a little bit more than the Reds have between now and then. But like, looking at these two teams now, where they are, where they were back in 1990, and then looking at the landscape that, you know, we're about to watch Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani face off, like, our team's got some players, but it feels like they're not as close as we would like them to be after 34 years to the ultimate goal.
Do you think that has a lot to do with not spending on the free agents? Do you think it has a little bit to do with the chemistry? I mean, you look back at that Reds team and you had Davis, you had O'Neill, but there was no real legitimate superstar on that team. It was together from one day, you know, from the top of the order to the bottom of the order. The pitching staff was solid. You had Rijo, you had Browning, you had Armstrong, solid. But there was nothing that really steps out about that team where you're like, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, is like, it almost seems as if modern day development, at least up until the last couple of years, was super focused on, can we get that superstar? Can we develop that dude that's going to be the draw and bring everything else into focus? And while the Reds had a couple of guys that were good, they just never built together a whole team. The most complete team that they had was 2012. And the fact that Buster Posey that grand slam still hurts. In fact, I probably just triggered a couple of folks listening to this, even just mentioning that play. But there's something about that team and the perfect nature with which that season fell together. That's the last time, and I think probably the last time ever, the Reds will experience a season where they only had 5 guys make all but one start. And the only reason that they had another guy make that one start is because it was a doubleheader, and they didn't want to mess up their rotation. They just enjoyed so much health that you've got to build such a deep organization. And I think for one reason or another, the Reds have just been very, very bad at developing. And as much as they have tried to, convince us every single year that the way that they're going to win is to draft and develop from within, they haven't done that for most of the last 30 years. And hopefully they're turning a corner with that. And kind of looking at the A's, I mean, it's, there was Moneyball, which I know your first episode, you kind of debunked that a little bit, at least the movie. And there's all of that. Like, what does the development landscape look like in Oakland now?
We've drafted the right guys. And I think the key piece with regard to the development that gives the A's and let's say the Reds as well, an opportunity is giving the youngsters a chance instead of signing the free agents, right? When you're signing a free agent for X amount of dollars, no matter if they end up turning out to be a bust or a youngster's better, you have to play them because you have to justify what you paid the individual. Well, our franchise don't need to worry about that. And we're giving these youngsters a chance to play. And in a lot of circumstances, they are better than the guys that are hitting their 7th year of MLB service and getting their first free agent contract. But again, how does a GM justify bringing up a youngster over signing a free agent that has been proven? So, we have gotten the guys. They are going to get their opportunity. What that turns out to be, who knows? I don't think there's longevity in it. I think it's great to build, but you always still have to sign a few of those free agents to support the youngsters you have. And unfortunately, the A's have not done that in the last 2 or 3 years. So, here we are.
Really appreciate getting to talk with Booney about the World Series. I mean, hey, the Reds won that World Series, so it was nice of him to come on and talk about losing to the Reds. And yeah, that was a long time ago. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of that postseason success here in the near future. But that's going to do it for us here today. Booney is going to be covering the A's just like I cover the Reds every single day. So make sure you subscribe to him, subscribe to me, get your baseball fix all year long, all throughout the offseason, because we're going to be with you every single day. And coming up next week, we're going to look at the moment when everything changed for the Reds in 2024. And I don't think it's the moment that you are thinking of right now. Can I read your mind? Can I? No, I'm not. I'm not getting anything. Or maybe it's because I'm looking at a camera. I'm looking at myself. I'm not getting anything. Anyway, thanks so much for checking out today's Locked On Reds podcast. And for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, as Sully has you covered for the World Series and beyond every single day, because we are both part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And as we move into the portion of the offseason where hopefully there's going to be lots and lots of wonderful news about the Cincinnati Reds, you can trust that we will be Locked On Reds every single day.